border clash between India and China gets violent. China downplays the dangers of COVID, and the U.S. Congress looks at a TikTok ban. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Incogni. You probably know the companies are collecting your personal data, but you may not realize just how many. Dozens, maybe hundreds, most of which you've never heard of. You have no idea what they're doing with it. Incogni helps stop them. I'll explain more at the end. There was another clash last week between India and Chinese troops at the disputed border between the two countries. It happened here at Tawang in the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. It's along this border known as the Line of Actual Control. Tawang is a politically sensitive location. Although India has controlled this area since the 1950s, China still claims it. It's on the border with Tibet. Tawang is the site of the largest Buddhist monastery in India. It's the birthplace of a past Dalai Lama. And in 1959, the current Dalai Lama fled through Tawang to get out of China. In fact, every time the Dalai Lama visits Tawang, like he did in 2017, the Chinese Communist Party gets upset about it. Although, to be fair, the CCP gets upset anytime the Dalai Lama does anything. The Dalai Lama ate pizza? Clearly, this Tibetan splitist is undermining China-Italy ties. So what happened during the border clash at Tawang? Indian and Chinese troops apparently used fists, clubs, and stun guns, and soldiers were injured on both sides. India's defense minister said Chinese troops encroached into Indian territory and unilaterally tried to change the status quo, while the Chinese military said the Chinese side was doing a routine patrol, and it was the Indian army who had illegally crossed the line. And Chinese state-run media started accusing India of harming ties with its border adventurism. You gotta hand it to the Chinese Communist Party. This is a classic move. Accuse the other side of doing what you're actually doing. Because it's China that keeps building more infrastructure along the disputed border with India, like bridges and highways, not to mention a new permanent military post along the border. And it's no wonder India is concerned about the Chinese Communist Party unilaterally changing the status quo, when the party is pretty much already doing that in neighboring Nepal, by slowly claiming and occupying more and more territory across the border. But sure, it's India's border adventurism that's the problem here. And now to the aftermath of a different type of CCP attack. 6 Chinese diplomats from the consulate in Manchester have left the UK. They were all involved in attacking a Hong Kong protester outside the consulate. Officials were recalled by China, not kicked out by the UK. This was after the UK government told China these officials needed to waive their right to diplomatic immunity so the Manchester police could question them. One of the officials was Consul General Zheng Xiyuan, who personally pulled the hair of the protester and defended himself by saying this.
I don't attack anybody. I'm the peacefully.
That's not true though, is it, Consul General? You pulled the man's hair.
Yeah, the man is because he's abused my country, my leader. I think it's my duty.
To pull his hair?
Yeah, I think it's any diplomats, if faced to such kind of the behavior.
That just sums up the CCP. I'm pulling your hair because it's my duty. Up next, why China's COVID data is even more meaningless than before. Welcome back. As the Chinese Communist Party continues to back off from their zero COVID policy, China is now no longer going to record asymptomatic COVID cases. This isn't a surprise because the public mass testing system has basically collapsed. But for some reason, authorities plan to still release highly inaccurate numbers for how many people have symptomatic COVID. Even the New York Times now says that China's COVID data is meaningless, after believing it for years. People have been told to stay at home and test themselves instead of going to public testing sites. So there's no way the official numbers show how many people in China actually have COVID. And that's the way the Communist Party wants it. You see, the party knows there's going to be a big COVID spike, But they don't want people to panic and then blame the party. So the propaganda is all about how everything is under control. State-run media have gone from talking about how long COVID is devastating the West to running articles where China's top respiratory disease expert says the Omicron variant should just be called a coronavirus cold. See, everything's under control. This week, the People's Daily published an official editorial about how great the Chinese Communist Party has done in protecting the Chinese people over the last 3 years. With gems like this. Practice has fully proved that the Chinese Communist Party has an incomparably strong leadership and is the most reliable backbone of the Chinese people when storms strike. Protests calling for the CCP to step down? What protests? The people love the party. The point is, as long as the people unite more closely around the party and Comrade Xi Jinping, victory will ultimately belong to the heroic Chinese people. I'm sure that the Chinese people feel victorious now that COVID is ripping through the ranks of medical staff and people are afraid to leave their homes in Beijing, while the city is hit with food and medicine shortages. Remember, the Communist Party has everything under control. Meanwhile, a World Health Organization official says China's current COVID spike isn't because authorities lifted COVID restrictions. Instead, he says that COVID-19 infections were exploding in China well before the government's decision to abandon its strict zero-COVID policy, and that zero COVID wasn't actually stopping the disease. Well, I'm shocked. Is it possible that the Chinese Communist Party saw the writing on the wall, knew cases were about to explode, and instead of admitting zero COVID was failing, decided to suddenly dismantle their policy so something else could be blamed for the huge COVID wave? Something like, say, anti-CCP protesters who wanted to lift COVID restrictions? And after the break, it's been a rough week for TikTok. Welcome back. This week, the governor of Iowa banned the TikTok app from state-owned devices. North Dakota's governor did something similar, and so did Alabama and Utah. New York is considering doing the same. This is all because of spying concerns, since TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, is Chinese. Last month, FBI Director Christopher Wray warned that the Chinese government could use TikTok to control data collection on U.S. users or use the app for influence operations. So far, all these actions have been taken by state governments. But this week, the U.S. Senate also passed a bill barring federal employees from using TikTok on their government-owned devices. And that's not all. It's easiest for the U.S. government to ban TikTok from government devices. But now, a bipartisan group of lawmakers has introduced a bill to completely ban TikTok in the U.S. The bill is called the Averting the National Threat of Internet Surveillance, Oppressive Censorship and Influence, and Algorithmic Learning by the Chinese Communist Party Act, also known as the Anti-Social CCP Act. You know, I make fun of Congress a lot for all their absurd acronyms, but I gotta say, that one's actually pretty good. Still absurd, but pretty good. The bill would block and prohibit all transactions from TikTok and ByteDance in the U.S. It would also ban other social media companies with more than 1 million users that are located in or under the substantial influence of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, or Venezuela from operating in the U.S. Although I have to say I'm not as worried about North Korean social media. Their most popular app never really caught on in the U.S. It's called Food Finder. In related news, the U.S. is cracking down on more Chinese companies over security concerns. One of the companies is YMTC, a major Chinese chip maker, which was in talks to supply Apple. These companies were put on the Entity List, which makes it hard for them to access U.S. technology. And 23 other companies, including companies supplying the Chinese and Russian militaries with advanced chips used for artificial intelligence, were hit with harsher restrictions. They won't be able to buy products made anywhere in the world with the use of American technology or software, which is huge. And in Hong Kong, some actual good news for a change. A Hong Kong democracy activist won her appeal, something I never thought I would say again. Chow Hong-tung had been charged and sentenced with inciting an unauthorized assembly for calling for people to join a vigil for the Tiananmen Square massacre last year. A Hong Kong judge reversed the sentence, saying that what Chow did was not illegal because it may not have been legal for the police to ban the vigil in the first place, which is great news. However, Chow is still in custody because she's still facing 2 more charges under the national security law. I mean, it's still Hong Kong. And finally today, speaking of justice, the FBI has arrested a Chinese citizen for stalking a Chinese democracy activist. Xiaolei Wu is a student at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. He was charged with stalking for threatening a woman who was posting flyers on campus calling for freedom and democracy in China. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office, beginning in late October, Wu made a series of communications via WeChat, email, and Instagram directed towards the victim who posted the flyer. Among other things, Wu allegedly said, "Post more, I will chop your bastard hands off." The Chinese Communist Party encourages this kind of behavior. They want Chinese people overseas to feel scared of speaking out against the party. Speaking of scaring people, Wu also tried to find out where the activist lived and publicly posted her email address so that others could abuse her online. According to the FBI, Wu also reported the activist's support for democracy to Chinese police so they would investigate her and her family. Wu has now appeared in court, but it's unclear whether he's entered a plea. If convicted, he could face up to 5 years in prison. Or they could just deport him to China, where all the negative publicity he's gotten won't get him in any trouble at all with the Chinese authorities. And this episode has been sponsored by Incogni. Whenever you do anything online, there's a huge number of companies that collect your personal data. Your name, your email, your home address, your credit card info, and lots more. That's why I signed up for Incogni. When I signed up in February this year, I discovered there were dozens of data brokers that potentially had my private information. And that means companies are buying and selling my personal info. That makes it easier for companies and governments to track me. And even worse, because that data is now out there, it can be hacked. Data breaches have been on the rise this year, which means my personal information is at risk now more than ever. Fortunately, Incogni has been forcing these companies to delete my data. As of today, Incogni has already gotten my details removed from 79 of these data brokers, with a lot more in progress. And I didn't actually have to do anything after signing up. Incogni just handles it. So seriously, get Incogni for yourself. Click the link below or go to incogni.com/uncensored. The first 100 people to use the code Uncensored will get 20% off. Get your personal data off the market with Incogni. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.